Some of these were hidden for 40 years. One of them was a gun built to kill you and leave no trace. And every single one of them was done by your own government, on paper, signed, and then locked away in a vault where they prayed you would never look.
Tonight, we open 8 more files. Real operations, real documents, real victims.
They were denied for decades until a leak, a lawsuit, or a clerical mistake dragged them into the daylight. So sit back, because the first file is not a spy story. It is a hospital in America where the doctors were the threat. File 1, the Tuskegee study. In 1932, the United States Public Health Service went into one of the poorest counties in Alabama and recruited around 600 black men, most of them sharecroppers who had never seen a doctor in their lives. The government told them they were being treated for bad blood. It was a lie. 399 of those men already had syphilis, and the real plan was not to cure them. It was to watch them die slowly and then study their bodies to document exactly what untreated syphilis does to a human being from start to finish. The men were given free meals, free rides, and fake medicine, sugar pills and aspirin, so they would keep coming back. They were never told what they really had. Then came the part that turns a tragedy into a crime. In 1947, penicillin became the standard cure for syphilis. A cheap, simple injection could have saved every one of them. The government chose not to give it. Worse, doctors actively worked to keep these men away from treatment, even contacting the local draft board to make sure they were not drafted, because the army would have cured them. The study was supposed to last 6 months. It ran for 40 years. It only ended in 1972, when a whistleblower named Peter Bachstun finally went to the press, and the Associated Press put it on front pages across the country. By then, dozens of men were dead from syphilis, their wives had been infected, and children had been born with the disease. It took until 1997 for a sitting president to stand up and formally apologize. 40 years in a government hospital, and the only reason it ever stopped is that one man refused to stay quiet. And believe me, it only gets darker from here. File 2, Operation Mockingbird. Everything you just heard, you learned because a journalist printed it. So ask yourself a harder question. What happens when the agency owns the journalist?
Starting in the early 1950s, quietly built a network inside the American news media.
The idea was simple and chilling. Recruit reporters, editors, and even entire news organizations to publish what the agency wanted and to bury what it did not, according to the reporter Carl Bernstein, one of the men who broke Watergate. More than 400 American journalists secretly carried out assignments for over 25 years. Some were paid, some did it for access, some did not even know who they were really working. The agency planted stories, shaped coverage of foreign coups, and used trusted American newspapers as a delivery system for propaganda. The Church Committee, the Senate investigation of the 1970s, confirmed that and maintained a network of hundreds of foreign and American media assets. The agency officially said it would stop using accredited American journals, but the damage was already done, and the lesson was permanent. For years, Americans opened their morning paper, believing they were reading the news. Some of the time, they were reading whatever an intelligence officer wanted them to believe. The next file is what happens when that same agency stops working with words and starts working with a gun. File 3, the heart attack gun. In 1975, in a Senate hearing room, something happened that looked like a scene from a movie, except it was real, and it was being shown to the American people for the first time. Senator Frank Church held up a strange-looking pistol, almost like a toy, and explained what it did. It fired a tiny, frozen dart made of a shellfish toxin, so small and so sharp that the target would never even feel it enter the skin. The dart would melt away inside the body. The poison would trigger what looked exactly like a heart attack. And then the only evidence, a tiny red dot the size of a mosquito bite, would fade. A perfect murder, leaving a corpse that any coroner would rule a natural death. Here is the part that should stop you cold. In 1970, President Nixon had ordered to destroy its entire stockpile of biological poisons. The agency was told in writing to get rid of all of it, but a scientist inside quietly refused. He kept a hidden cache of deadly toxins, including enough shellfish poison to kill thousands of people. Locked away in direct defiance of a presidential order, it was only discovered years later during the investigations, sitting in a freezer. The government had built the perfect assassination weapon, been ordered to destroy the poison that fed it, and then hidden that poison instead. The next file leaves the lab and takes down an entire country. File 4, Operation Ajax. In 1953, the nation of Iran had something rare in that part of the world, a democratically elected leader. His name was Mohammed Mossadegh, and he had committed one unforgivable sin.
He nationalized Iran's oil, taking it back from a British company so the profits would go to the Iranian people instead of London.
Britain was furious, and it convinced the United States that Mossadegh had to go. So the CIA, working with British intelligence, ran a covert operation to overthrow the elected government of another country. They called it TPAJAX. CIA officers on the ground spread propaganda, bribed politicians, paid mobs to riot in the streets, and even hired fake protesters to make the country look like it was collapsing into chaos. Within days, the elected prime minister was arrested, and they put the Shah back on the throne as an absolute monarch friendly to the West. For 60 years, the agency refused to admit it had done it. Then, in 2013, on the operation's anniversary, it finally released documents that openly acknowledged the truth. The coup was carried out as an act of US foreign policy, conceived and approved at the highest level. The fallout never stopped. The brutal rule of the Shah, the resentment that built for a generation, and the revolution of 1979 that turned Iran into an enemy of America. All of it traces back to one secret operation to steal a country's oil. The next file is a secret war run against an island 90 miles from File 5, Operation Mongoose. After the failed Bay of Pigs invasion humiliated the United States in 1961, the Kennedy administration did not back down from Cuba. It went underground and launched what became one of the largest covert operations in American history. The goal, in the government's own words, was to use every available resource to help Cuba overthrow its communist government. In practice, that meant a secret war of sabotage. The operation was run by a colonel named Edward Lansdale, the president's own brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, pushing it forward almost daily. They dreamed up dozens of schemes to wreck the Cuban economy and break the will of the people. They planned to contaminate sugar that Cuba exported, to burn sugarcane fields, to blow up mines and factories, to sabotage imported machinery so it would break down. Around 400 American personnel worked on it, with a budget in the tens of millions. Running one of the busiest stations in the world, out of Miami, they considered staging fake attacks to justify an invasion. They explored every dirty trick imaginable to make an entire nation suffer enough to rise up. In the end, none of it worked. The government survived, the sabotage failed to topple anyone, and the program was quietly wound down. But the documents, declassified decades later, lay it all out. A sustained, secret campaign of economic destruction, signed off at the highest levels of the United States government. And the next file is what happened when that government turned its experiments on its own soldiers. File 6, Project 112 through the 1960s and into the 1970s. The United States military wanted to know how its ships, its bases, and its troops would hold up against chemical and biological attack. So it decided to find out by spraying real agents on its own people, often without telling them. The naval side of the program was called Project SHAD, short for Shipboard Hazard and Defense. Sailors were sent out to sea on their ships, and while they went about their duty, aircraft and other vessels sprayed them with chemical and biological materials to measure how the clouds spread and how the men exposed. Some of the substances were simulants, some were real nerve agents and live biological agents. The men were not warned, were not asked, and for decades were not told what they had been exposed to. Thousands of service members across dozens of tests breathed in whatever the government wanted to study that day. Many spent the rest of their lives with mysterious illnesses, never connecting it to their time in uniform. Because the records were classified, it was not until 2000 and the years after that the Pentagon was finally forced to admit Project 112 and SHAD had even existed, and to start identifying the veterans who had been used as unwitting test subjects. They had volunteered to defend their country. Their country used them to test poison. The last file tonight is the one the whole world has argued about, and the truth is stranger than the legend. File 7, Operation Chaos. By the late 1960s, America was tearing itself apart over the Vietnam War, and the government became convinced that foreign powers had to be secretly funding the protests. So it gave the job of finding out to the one agency that was legally forbidden from spying on Americans. The operation was called Chaos, and for years it did exactly what it was never supposed to do. It spied on American citizens, on American soil, for their political beliefs. CI officers infiltrated anti-war groups and black activist organizations. They opened private mail. They built a massive database with files on around 7,200 individual Americans. and a master index of more than 300,000 names and organizations. Students, journalists, activists, ordinary people whose only crime was opposing a war. And after all of that spying, the agency found what honest analysts had said all along. There was no significant foreign control of the protest movement. Americans were protesting because Americans were angry. The whole illegal operation was built to prove a conspiracy that did not exist. When the Church Committee exposed it in the 1970s, it became one of the clearest examples of an intelligence agency turning its weapons inward against the very citizens it was created to protect. And now, the final file. After all the spying and the poison, this one is the question that never goes away. File 8, the one you have been waiting for, Roswell and the files behind the flying saucer. In July of 1947, a rancher near Roswell, New Mexico, found strange debris scattered across his field. The local Army Air Base put out a press release that made headlines around the world. The military had recovered a flying disc. One day later, the Army suddenly changed its story and said it was only a weather balloon. That reversal, that one-day flip from flying saucer to weather balloon, is what built the most famous UFO legend on Earth. For 50 years, the government said almost nothing, and into that silence poured every story of alien bodies and crashed spacecraft you have ever heard. Then the truth came out, and it was a secret, just not that kind. In the 1990s, declassified documents revealed that the debris really was a balloon, but not a weather. It was from Project Mogul, a top-secret program using high-altitude balloon trains to spy on Soviet nuclear tests by listening for the sound wave. The military had lied in 1947, but to hide a spy program, not a spaceship. And the wider mystery has the same fingerprints. For more than 20 years, the Air Force ran Project Blue Book, officially investigating UFO reports. It closed in 1969 after logging over 12,000 sightings and concluded that the overwhelming majority were aircraft, balloons, weather, or stars, with a small number left simply unexplained. Real secrets were hiding behind the saucers the whole time, just not the ones people wanted to believe.
8 more files. A hospital that let men die for 40 years. An agency that owned the newsroom.
A gun that fakes a heart attack. Democracy erased to take its oil. A secret war on a neighbor.
Soldiers used as test subjects, a spy ring aimed at the American people, and a flying saucer that turned out to be a different secret entirely. Everyone denied until someone refused to keep it buried. And here's the thought to leave you with tonight. These are only the ones they were forced to admit, the freezer of poison that survived a presidential order.
The 400 journalists, the 300,000 names. If this is what they confessed to, imagine what is still sitting in the files they will never open.
Tell me in the comments which file shook you the most and which one you want me to open next. Subscribe to the Unknown Files, and I will see you when the next one is declassified.